Ethan walked through the long marble hall, his boots making a steady sound against the polished floor. The tall windows let the sunlight fall on golden pillars and red banners. The air smelled of roses and something sweet like fresh bread. He felt the eyes of many people on him. Nobles in fine clothes whispered behind their fans. Some smiled, others looked with sharp eyes, the face calm. He had faced war and death. A hall full of nobles was nothing to fear, but it still felt strange. He wore his simple uniform, dark and neat. A silver medal rested on his chest, a mark of what he had done in the Great Continental War. People called him a hero, but he never felt like one. His hands had seen too much blood, and his heart carried a weight no metal could remove. Today he had not come for honor. He had come because the Queen had called him. At the end of the hall stood Queen Eleanor. Her crown shone in the light, and her gown flowed like water. She sat on a tall chair that looked like a throne of light wood and silver. When her eyes met his, he bowed. She raised her hand, a small smile on her lips. "Sir Ethan," her voice was warm, clear, and strong. "The kingdom owes you much. Your courage ended the war. You gave us peace." Ethan nodded. "I only did my duty, Your Majesty." She looked at him for a long moment, as if she could read the silence inside him. Then she spoke again. "You know why I asked you here?" He did not answer at once. He had heard the whispers, a union, bond between him and her daughter. It would join two great powers and bring more peace. But he had no place in that dream. Not him, not with what he carried inside. Queen Eleanor's smile grew softer. "My daughter Claire has heard of your name since she was a child. She has asked to meet you. She admires the man who gave hope to this land." Ethan kept his eyes on the floor. He had faced guns, fire, and storms. But this was harder. Words were harder than bullets. "I am honored," he said at last. The Queen rose from her chair. "Come, she waits for you in the royal garden." They walked through another hall. The walls held paintings of kings and queens of old. They passed guards who stood straight as stone. When the doors opened, a soft wind touched his face. The garden was wide and bright, full of flowers in every color. A fountain sang in the middle, and birds flew from tree to tree. There she stood, Princess Claire. Her dress was white with a blue ribbon at the waist. Her hair shone in the sun, and her eyes were bright like the morning sky. She turned when she heard them and smiled. It was not the smile of a princess for a soldier. It was the smile of someone kind. "Sir Ethan," she said in a voice gentle as the wind, "I have waited to meet you." He bowed again. "Your Highness." She walked closer. "You fought for us. You gave us peace. I wanted to thank you with my own words." Ethan felt her eyes on him, and it made his chest heavy. She was pure light, and he was full of shadows. "I only did what was needed," he said. They walked by the fountain. She asked him about the war, about his life before it. He answered, but his words were short. He kept his eyes on the water, not on her face. He could feel her hope, her wish to know him, but he could not let her close. Not to the truth, not to the man he really was. When the sun began to set, he asked to leave. She nodded, but he saw the question in her eyes. Why was he so far away? Why did he keep his walls so high? Later that night, the Queen called for him again. Her face was calm, but her voice carried steel. "Why do you turn from her?" she asked. "Why do you hurt her heart?" Ethan said nothing, not yet, but the time for silence was ending. Ethan walked out of the Queen's chamber with heavy steps. The question still echoed in his mind. Why do you turn from her? He had no easy answer. It was not something the Queen could understand in a single moment. It was not pride, not fear, but something deeper, something that chained his soul to the dark days of war. The next morning, the sound of birds filled the royal garden. Catham was asked to join Princess Claire again. Catham refusing, but that would only bring more questions. So he walked back through the marble halls, past the bright glass windows and gold-framed doors, until he saw her again. She stood near the fountain, holding a small book in her hand. When she saw him, her face lit up like the first light of day. "Good morning, Sir Ethan," she said with a smile. "I hoped you would come." Ethan bowed slightly. "Good morning, Your Highness." She shook her head gently. "Call me Claire, please." "I'm not your queen." Her words made him pause. Few people had spoken to him that way, not even officers during the war. He nodded, but he did not speak her name. It felt too close, too soft for a man like him. Claire started walking along the stone path. "I wanted to know more about you," she said. "Not the soldier the world talks about, but the man behind the sword." Ethan walked beside her. The garden smelled of roses and fresh grass. He could hear the splash of water in the fountain and the distant bells of the city beyond the palace walls. He thought of the man she wanted to know. That man was long gone, buried under smoke and fire. "There is little to tell," he said. "I grew up in a small town. I worked on the land before the war. Then the war came and I went where I was told." She looked at him, her eyes bright with curiosity. "And now? What do you want now that the war is over?" Ethan kept his eyes ahead. "Peace," he said after a long pause. "Nothing more." "Peace is good," she said softly. "But peace is empty without someone to share it with." Her words struck something deep in him. He felt a sharp ache in his chest, but he said nothing. They reached a bench under a tall tree. Claire sat down and patted the space beside her. Ethan stood for a moment, then sat down slowly. The bench felt too small, too close. Claire opened the book in her hand. "Do you read?" she asked. "Not much," he said. "I learned to read maps and orders, not stories." She smiled again. "Then let me read to you." She began reading from the book. Her voice was calm, smooth, like a quiet stream. The words spoke of hope and light, of a world without fear. Ethan listened, but his mind kept slipping back to other sounds, the roar of guns, the cries of men, the silence after a blast. He clenched his hands until his knuckles turned white. When she finished, she closed the book and looked at him. "You are far away," she said. "Where do you go when your eyes turn cold like that?" Ethan stood up at once. "I should leave." "Please," she said, rising to her feet. "Did I say something wrong?" He shook his head. "No, it is not you." "Then what is it?" Her voice was soft but full of pain. "Why do you keep me away? Do you hate me?" He turned to her then, his face hard, but his eyes full of storms. "No, I do not hate you. That is why I keep my distance." Before she could speak, he bowed and walked away. His steps were quick, his breath heavy. Behind him, Claire stood still, the book clutched in her hands, her heart full of questions. That night, the Queen sent for him again. The great hall was quiet, lit by tall candles. She stood by the throne, her eyes sharp as a blade. "You will answer me now," she said. "Why do you shun her?" Ethan raised his head slowly. His voice was low, steady, and filled with pain. "Because if she knew what I have done," he said, "she would never smile again." The hall was silent except for the faint sound of the fire burning in the great hearth. Ethan stood before the Queen, his shadow stretching across the floor. Her eyes never left his face, sharp and unyielding. She stepped closer, her gown brushing the stone tiles. "What do you mean by that?" Queen Eleanor asked. Her voice was calm, but the edge in it was clear. "What have you done that would make my daughter lose her smile?" Ethan did not answer right away. He looked at the tall windows, at the darkness outside, and at the pale moon hanging above the gardens. His hands curled into fists, and then he let them go. He had carried this truth for years, locked away where no one could reach it. Now the lock was breaking. "Your Majesty," he said slowly. "I did what I had to do in the war. People call me a hero because I brought victory. They never ask what that victory cost." The Queen's eyes narrowed. "Then tell me. I will know the truth." Ethan lifted his head. "There was a city," he said, "a place full of life. Families, children, people who trusted us to protect them. When the enemy came, we were outnumbered. I had orders to hold the line, no matter the cost." He stopped for a moment, his breath heavy. The cost was fire. We burned the bridges, the homes, everything that could give the enemy cover. We destroyed the city to save the rest of the land. The Queen stared at him, her lips pressed into a thin line. He kept speaking, his voice low but hard as stone. "I gave the order. I watched the flames rise. I heard the cries of those who could not escape. They call me a hero for ending the war early. But the truth is, I killed the innocent to stop the enemy, and every night I see their faces." The hall felt colder now. The Queen said nothing for a long time. When she spoke, her voice had changed. It was no longer sharp, but heavy. "And you believe this makes you unworthy of my daughter?" "Yes," Ethan said. "She deserves light. I have only darkness. I cannot let her carry the weight I bear. Queen Eleanor stepped closer. Her eyes searched his face. You think pain makes you unworthy. You think hiding the truth will protect her. But do you know what truly breaks a heart, Sir Ethan? Lies, distance, silence. Ethan looked at her then. Her words struck like an arrow, but he said nothing. The queen turned and walked to the great doors. Before leaving, she spoke again. You will tell her, tomorrow in the garden. Let her decide what she sees in you. Do not take away her choice. The doors closed, leaving Ethan alone with the fire in his thoughts. He stood there for a long time, hearing the whispers of old flames in his mind. The next day came with a gray sky and a cold wind. Ethan walked to the garden as the queen had ordered. The fountain still sang, and the flowers still bloomed, but the air felt heavy. Claire was already there, waiting by the stone bench under the tree. When she saw him, her face lit up with hope, but it faded when she saw his eyes. You wanted to speak, she said softly. Yes, Ethan said. His voice was flat, but his heart pounded like a drum. He sat on the bench, leaving space between them. For a moment, he looked at the ground, then at her. Her eyes were bright, full of questions. He took a breath and began. You ask me why I keep you away, he said. You asked if I hate you? I do not. But there are things about me you do not know. Things that would make you see me as a monster, not a man. She shook her head. I could never see you that way. He looked at her, his eyes dark. You say that now. But when you hear the truth, you will understand why I cannot let you near me. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady. Then tell me. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them. His voice was quiet, but every word was clear. I killed them, he said. Not soldiers, but men with guns. Families, children, I burned them to save the rest. And now, no matter what people call me, I live with that. Every day. Claire's breath caught. She stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. The garden was silent except for the soft sound of the fountain. Ethan waited, ready for her to turn away, ready for her to hate him, but she did not move. Not yet. Claire stood very still, the wind lifting a strand of her hair as her eyes stayed on Ethan. Her heart pounded in her chest. The words he had spoken were heavy, full of pain, but she did not step back. She did not look away. Ethan waited for anger, for fear, for the disgust he believed he deserved. Instead, Claire spoke softly. You did that to save others? Ethan's jaw tightened. It does not matter why. It matters that I gave the order. I set the fire. Their screams still follow me, even now. Claire took a slow step toward him. You had no choice, she said. Her voice shook, but not from fear. You were in a war. You did what you thought would save the most lives. He shook his head. It does not make it right. I ended the war, but I lost myself in the fire. People call me a hero, but I am nothing close to that. If you knew what it is like to see children in flames, you would not stand so near me. Her eyes filled with tears, but they did not fall. She came closer and sat on the bench beside him. For a long time she said nothing. The fountain sang, and the gray clouds rolled above them. Then, in a steady voice, she spoke. I do not see a monster. I see a man who carries a weight no one should carry alone. Ethan turned to her, his face hard with disbelief. You do not understand. No, she said, I do not. I have never seen war. But I know this if you feel this much pain, it means your heart is still alive. A monster would not feel anything. A monster would not hate himself for what he did. He looked at her hands resting on her lap, small and still. Claire, he said quietly, I cannot bring that darkness into your life. She lifted her head, her eyes bright like a storm breaking. You do not get to decide what my life should hold. You think you are protecting me, but you are only running from yourself. Ethan stood, his chest tight. You deserve someone better. Someone clean. She rose too, her voice stronger now. Better does not mean clean. Better means true. And you are true, Ethan. You do not hide behind lies. That matters more than you know. The sound of footsteps broke the moment. Queen Eleanor walked into the garden, her gown sweeping across the stones. She looked at them both with eyes that missed nothing. Have you told her? She asked Ethan. Yes, he said. His voice was heavy, but steady. She knows. The queen studied her daughter's face, then Ethan's. And now you know why he keeps his distance. Claire spoke before Ethan could answer. Yes, she said, and it changes nothing. The queen's brow lifted slightly. Nothing, nothing, Claire repeated. What he had to do. If the price of peace was his soul, then I will help him find it again. Ethan stared at her, stunned. You cannot heal what is broken in me, he said. Maybe not, she said softly, but I can stand beside you while you try. The queen's eyes softened, though her face stayed calm. You choose a hard road, Claire. I choose my road, Claire said. The queen looked at Ethan then, and you. Will you keep running from what you are? Or will you fight for something worth more than war? Ethan felt the weight of her words press against him like armor he could not take off. He looked at Claire, at her steady eyes, at the strength he had not expected in her. For the first time in years he felt something break not in pain, but in hope. I do not know if I can, he said. Then let me believe for you, Claire whispered. The queen stepped back, leaving them in silence. The sky was darker now, the first drops of rain falling on the garden stones. Claire did not move away. She stood close, her presence warm even in the cold wind. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them he saw, not judgment, not fear, but light. For the first time since the war, he let himself breathe. The rain fell harder as evening came. The garden stones were slick, and the fountain rippled under the drops. Ethan stood with his hands at his sides, his heart pounding as if he had just left a battlefield. Claire did not move away. She stayed close, her dress heavy with rain, her face calm but full of strength. You should go inside, Ethan said. Gosh. His voice was rough, like gravel. You will catch cold. She shook her head. Not without you. Ethan stared at her. Her words were simple, but they struck deeper than any blade. He wanted to tell her no again, to turn and walk away, to go back to the shadows he knew. But something in her eyes stopped him. She was not afraid. She was not running. She was standing against the storm with him. Slowly, Ethan stepped toward her. Rain slid down his face, mixing with the heat in his eyes. You do not understand what life with me would be, he said. It is not a life of peace. It is a life chained to the past. Claire reached for his hand. Her fingers were cold but steady. Then break the chain, she said. Not for me, for yourself. The words settled in him like a spark in dry wood. For years he had carried the weight alone, thinking that silence was strength, that distance was the only way to protect others. Now he saw that silence was only another kind of prison. They stood there as the rain poured, and for the first time Ethan did not pull away. He let her hold his hand. He let the warmth of her touch cut through the cold that had lived in him for so long. The queen watched from the tall windows of the hall. Her face was unreadable, but inside her heart was calm. She had feared this meeting would end in pain. Now she saw something else a chance. Not for power, not for politics, but for life to return to a man who had given everything for others. Later, when the storm passed, Ethan and Claire walked back into the palace together. Servants whispered as they passed, but neither of them heard. They went to a quiet room near the east wing, where a fire burned low. Ethan stood near the flames, feeling their heat, watching the shadows dance. Claire sat close, her hands folded on her lap. I do not know how to live without war, Ethan said, after a long silence. Then learn, she said. Start small. Start with this. Sit, breathe, and let someone care for you. He looked at her, at the soft firelight on her face, and for the first time, he felt the wall inside him crack. Out. He sat down, slowly, as if he feared the chair might break. Claire smiled faintly, not in triumph, but in quiet peace. Days turned to weeks. The whispers in the palace grew louder. Some nobles spoke against him. A soldier had no place beside a princess, they said. Others feared that his name, his past, would stain the royal house. Ethan heard it all, but he no longer carried the weight alone. Claire stood beside him in every hall, at every meal. Her voice was calm, her eyes bright, and no one dared speak against her in her presence. One morning, Queen Eleanor called them both to the great hall. The sun streamed through the tall windows, and the air smelled of fresh flowers. She looked at her daughter first, then at Ethan. You have chosen your path, the Queen said. It will not be easy. There will be those who fight it. If this is what you both wish, then I will not stand in the way. Claire's eyes shone as she nodded. Ethan bowed his head, his voice firm. It is what I wish. The Queen gave a small smile, rare and bright, and let the bells ring, not for war, but for a new dawn. That night, the city lights burned like stars across the hills. Bells rang from every tower, and people filled the streets with cheers. In the east wing, Ethan stood by the window, looking out at the lights. For years, sound had meant danger, smoke, and pain. Now it meant hope. It meant life. Claire came to stand beside him. She touched his hand and whispered, "The past is behind us." Ethan looked at her and, for the first time in years, let a true smile touch his face. "Yes," he said. "Behind us?" And for the first time since the war, Ethan believed it.